I got fired via press release while I was hiking in Sedona. I wasn't checking email. I wasn't checking Slack. I pulled out my phone to check the weather, and saw my corporate login had been deactivated. Then I saw the news alert. Aegis Grid Solutions streamlines operations. Senior Architect Rain Vance departs to pursue new opportunities. Before we dive into what happened next, welcome. This channel is about the overlooked fighting back against the companies that screwed them over. Drop a comment with your city below, and hit subscribe if you love seeing corporate justice served cold. Now, back to why the grid was about to go dark. 10 years. 3,000 substations across 7 states. Countless nights in control rooms manually adjusting load balancers because the automated systems couldn't predict what I could see coming 3 hours in advance. And Preston Miller, my boss, the COO who couldn't explain the difference between voltage and amperage, just fired me while I was 500 miles away. On vacation. Pursue new opportunities. That's corporate speak for we fired you and we're not paying severance. Here's what Preston didn't know. 2 years ago, I watched him throw another engineer under the bus for a budget mistake that wasn't her fault. Brilliant woman. Built half our monitoring systems. He fired her in front of the entire department to save his own ass. That's when I started keeping insurance. I began filing patents. For the bridge software I'd written, the code that connected our legacy systems to the new grid infrastructure. The software Aegis was using every single day to keep the lights on in 7 states. I wrote it on my laptop. On my own time. On weekends. In the margins where nobody was paying attention. And I made very, very sure that my name was on the paperwork. Not Aegis's. Not Preston's. Mine. Preston thought he could replace me with a chatbot and save $250,000 a year. He thought he owned me. He didn't realize I owned the keys to his entire operation. I sat down on that ridge in Sedona. Phone in my hand. Watching the sun drop behind the red rocks, purple and gold, absolutely perfect. And somewhere in New York, Preston Miller was about to have the worst month of his career. Because he didn't just fire me. He cut the brake lines on a 10-ton truck at 80 miles an hour on a mountain road. And I was about to teach him the most expensive lesson of his life. If you've ever been underestimated, undervalued, or replaced by someone who didn't understand what you actually did, you're going to love what happens next. Because this isn't just a corporate failure story. This is a masterclass in what happens when arrogance meets incompetence at 70 miles per hour. Let me take you back 6 months. Before Sedona. Before the press release. Before Preston made the biggest mistake of his professional life. It was a Tuesday night in Chicago. February. The kind of cold that makes your lungs hurt when you breathe. I was alone in the Aegis Grid Solutions control room on the 42nd floor. It was 11:30 at night. The city below me was a grid of lights, millions of people asleep in their beds, completely unaware that their electricity was being balanced by a woman drinking cold coffee and staring at 7 monitors. This was my life. Not the part people saw in meetings. Not the part that made it into Preston's quarterly reports. This was the real work. The part that happened when everyone else had gone home. On my center screen, I could see the load distribution across the eastern corridor. New York was pulling heavy. New Jersey was lying about capacity, they always did. Connecticut was stable. Pennsylvania was compensating. It was like conducting an orchestra where half the musicians won't admit they're out of tune. I made 3 adjustments in 15 minutes. Small things. A redirect here. A capacity shift there. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would ever show up in a report. But those 3 adjustments kept 2 million people from waking up in the dark. Preston had no idea I did this. He thought the system ran itself. The next morning, I walked into a conference room and found Preston standing in front of a PowerPoint presentation. The title slide read, AI-driven efficiency initiative. My stomach dropped. I knew immediately what this was. Preston had been under pressure from the private equity firm that owned Aegis. They wanted to see cost reductions and operational improvements. Translation: fire expensive people and replace them with cheaper alternatives. I was the most expensive person in the building who wasn't an executive. Rain, Preston said, flashing that smile he used when he was about to screw someone over. Thanks for joining us. I wanted to talk to you about the future of grid management. I sat down. Said nothing. He clicked to the next slide. A graph showing my salary versus the cost of an AI monitoring service based in Silicon Valley. You're brilliant, he said. But your salary is $250,000 a year. We've identified an AI solution that can handle load balancing for $30,000 annually. The board is asking questions. And frankly, we need to show that we're innovating. I looked at the graph. Then I looked at Preston. The AI can't predict harmonic oscillations, I said. It learns, Preston replied. Machine learning. It gets better over time. It learns from data, I said. It doesn't understand context. It doesn't know that New Jersey operators lie about capacity every summer because they don't want to admit they're running outdated equipment. It doesn't understand politics. And it definitely can't make a judgment call when the numbers don't match reality. Preston's smile didn't waver. Rain, I appreciate your concerns. But the technology has come a long way. And honestly, we can't justify your salary anymore. You're an expensive insurance policy. And the board doesn't think we need insurance. I stared at him, understanding exactly what he wasn't saying. This wasn't about efficiency. This was about the quarterly report he'd have to present in 2 weeks. This was about him looking good to the private equity partners who'd decide his bonus. You're firing me? We're transitioning you out, he said. You'll have 6 months to train your replacement. We'll provide a generous severance package. And I'm sure someone with your skills will land on their feet. I stood up. I'll need that in writing, I said. And I walked out. I didn't know it yet, but that conversation was going to cost Aegis Grid Solutions $800 million. But first, I had to make sure Preston couldn't come back from what I was about to do. That night, I didn't go home. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too hard to drive. I went to a 24-hour diner on the south side. Ordered eggs and toast I wouldn't eat. And pulled out my laptop to confirm what I already knew. Preston had just made the biggest mistake of his life. And I had the receipts. I opened a folder I'd been keeping for 2 years. Inside were copies of every patent I'd filed. Every piece of proprietary software I'd written on my own time. Every document that proved the bridge software connecting Aegis's legacy systems to the modern grid infrastructure wasn't theirs. It was mine. 2 years earlier, I'd watched Preston destroy another engineer's career. Her name was Maria Chen. Brilliant woman. She'd built half the monitoring systems Aegis used. And when Preston's own budget miscalculation came to light, he blamed her. Publicly. In front of the entire department. I can still see her face. The shock. The humiliation. Security escorted her out that afternoon while the rest of us sat in silence. I made a decision that day, if he could do it to her, he'd eventually do it to me. So I started keeping insurance. Every piece of code I wrote outside work hours went into a separate repository. Every innovation I created on weekends got documented. Every patent I filed listed me, and only me, as the inventor. I was methodical. I was careful. I made sure every timestamp, every commit log, every piece of documentation proved the work was mine. Done on my equipment. On my time. With my intellectual property. By the time Preston told me I was being transitioned out, I'd already secured intellectual property rights to the most critical piece of software in Aegis's entire operation. The bridge software was the translator. It connected the old grid, built in the 1970s with punch cards and analog switches, to the new digital monitoring systems. Without it, Aegis couldn't balance loads across state lines. They couldn't predict failures. They couldn't do anything except watch the lights go out. And I owned it. Preston thought he was firing an employee. He was actually evicting his landlord. Over the next 6 months, I watched Preston roll out his AI-driven efficiency initiative. He hired a team of consultants from Silicon Valley. Guys in their 20s who'd never worked a day in the energy sector but had impressive LinkedIn profiles and TED Talk experience. They installed the AI monitoring system, decommissioned my manual overrides, and assured Preston that machine learning would handle everything I used to do. I trained them, smiled, answered their questions. And I didn't tell them about the harmonic oscillations. I didn't tell them that every summer, when temperatures spiked above 100 degrees, the power lines in New Jersey started vibrating at a specific frequency. Or that if you didn't manually adjust the load distribution, those vibrations would cascade into a grid failure. I didn't tell them because they didn't ask. And Preston didn't think it mattered. On my last day, Preston shook my hand in the lobby. "No hard feelings," he said. "You've been a great asset to the company." I smiled. "Good luck with the AI," I said. And I walked out into the Chicago cold, knowing exactly what was coming. Because summer was coming. And the heat dome was already forming over the Northeast. 3 months later, I was in Sedona when I saw the first news alerts. July 15th. A heat dome, a massive column of trapped hot air, had settled over the northeastern United States like a lid on a boiling pot. New York City hit 107 degrees. Philadelphia, 111. Newark, 115. I sat on the patio of my rental, drinking iced coffee and watching the alerts roll in on my tablet. Weather maps showed this angry red mass squatting over the tri-state area. Meteorologists were calling it a once-in-a-generation event. I called it Tuesday. Because this happened every few years. The patterns were predictable if you knew what to look for. High-pressure system stalls over the Atlantic. Jet stream shifts north. Hot air gets trapped over the northeast corridor with nowhere to go. And 8 million people crank their air conditioning to maximum. I'd seen this before. Managed it before. Every summer, I'd watch the temperatures climb and start making adjustments 3 days in advance. Rerouting power. Shifting loads. Calling operators in New Jersey and telling them, politely but firmly, to stop lying about their capacity numbers. The grid could handle the heat. But only if someone who understood it was watching. I pulled up a private monitoring feed I still had access to, a backdoor I'd built into the system years ago for emergencies. Technically, I shouldn't have had access anymore. But when you build something from scratch, you tend to leave yourself a key. The numbers were already climbing into the red zone. And Preston's AI was doing exactly what I knew it would do. Nothing useful. At 2:15 p.m. Eastern, I watched the AI detect unusual frequency patterns in the New Jersey trunk lines. The numbers didn't match its models. So it did what it was programmed to do. It increased the load to the eastern corridor to stabilize the system. Which was exactly the wrong thing to do. I actually said it out loud. Sitting alone on my patio in Sedona, watching the numbers cascade across my screen. No. No, don't do that. But there was no one to hear me. Here's what the AI didn't understand, what it couldn't understand. Electricity isn't like water. You can't just store it in a tank and pour it out when you need it. It has to be generated and consumed at exactly the same rate, in real time, 24 hours a day. When demand spikes, like when 8 million people turn on their AC simultaneously, the grid has to compensate instantly. Pull power from other regions. Fire up backup generators. Reroute load through different transmission lines. It's a balancing act. And the key word is balance. Because if you push too much power through a transmission line, it heats up. The metal expands. The line starts to sag. And if it sags too much, it touches something it shouldn't, a tree, another line, the ground, and you get what's called a cascade failure. One line goes down. The load shifts to other lines. Those lines overload. They go down. The cascade spreads. And suddenly, you've got a blackout. But there's another problem. Something more subtle. More dangerous. When power lines heat up under heavy load, they start to vibrate. It's physics. The electrical current creates a magnetic field. The magnetic field interacts with the metal. And if the frequency hits just the right resonance, like a singer shattering a wine glass, the vibrations amplify. The lines start swinging. We call them harmonic oscillations. And if you don't adjust the load distribution to dampen those oscillations, the lines tear themselves apart. I used to handle this manually every summer. I'd watch the frequency readings, spot the oscillations starting, and make micro adjustments to the load distribution. Shift 5 megawatts here. 10 megawatts there. Small moves that kept the system stable. Preston's AI didn't know how to do this. Because you can't teach an algorithm to understand context. You can't train a machine learning model on New Jersey operators always lie or this particular trunk line has been sketchy since 2019. The AI saw data. I saw reality. And right now, reality was about to hit Preston Miller like a freight train. The increased load hit the trunk lines. The lines were already running hot from the heat. The additional power pushed them over the edge. The harmonic oscillations started. I could see it in the frequency data. The lines were vibrating. The oscillations were amplifying. And the AI was interpreting the instability as a reason to push more power through the system to compensate. It was like watching someone pour gasoline on a fire because the fire alarm said there wasn't enough heat. At 2:47 p.m., the first substation went down. A transformer in Newark overloaded and exploded. Not a metaphor. Literally exploded. 30,000 pounds of oil-cooled copper turning into a fireball you could see from 3 miles away. The load shifted to adjacent substations. They overloaded. They went down. The cascade had started. I switched to news feeds. CNN was already covering it. Aerial footage of Newark. Black smoke rising from the substation. Traffic lights going dark in real time as the blackout spread block by block. Then Times Square went dark. I'd seen a lot of things in 10 years of grid management. But I'd never seen Times Square go black in the middle of the afternoon. The billboards flickered. The lights died. And suddenly, the crossroads of the world looked like a ghost town. The news anchors were trying to stay calm, but you could hear the edge in their voices. This wasn't a planned outage. This wasn't a storm knocking down power lines. This was a system failure. And it was spreading. Brooklyn. Queens. Parts of Manhattan. Northern New Jersey. Sections of Connecticut. 8 million people without power. In 115-degree heat. I watched hospitals switch to backup generators. I watched traffic systems fail. I watched the chaos spread across the Northeast Corridor like a virus. And I knew exactly what was happening in Aegis's Emergency Operations Center. Preston would be standing in front of a wall of monitors, watching his AI-driven efficiency initiative collapse in real time. The consultants would be frantically typing commands that wouldn't work. The phone would be ringing with calls from governors, mayors, federal regulators. And someone, probably Preston's assistant, would be saying the words he didn't want to hear. We need rain, Vance. I closed my tablet. Looked out at the desert. The sunset was starting. Purple and gold spreading across the sky. Beautiful. Peaceful. And somewhere in Manhattan, in an emergency operations center that probably didn't have air conditioning anymore, Preston Miller was having the worst day of his life. I knew what was coming next. Because Preston had exactly one option left. He had to call me. And when he did, I was going to make him understand exactly what I was worth. My phone rang at 6:30 p.m. I let it ring 3 times. Then I answered. Rain. Thank God. Preston's voice was ragged. Like he'd been screaming for hours. Maybe he had. I put the phone on speaker and set it on the patio table. The Sedona sunset was in full bloom now, deep purples and oranges bleeding across the desert sky. I took a sip of my iced coffee and let him talk. We need you back. Immediately. The grid we're experiencing cascading failures across the tri-state area. 8 million people without power. The AI isn't responding correctly to the load patterns. I'm aware, I said. Silence. Then, you're aware? I still monitor the feeds, Preston. Professional curiosity. I could hear voices in the background. Yelling. Someone was shouting about generator capacity. Someone else was on another phone line talking to what sounded like the governor's office. Rain, listen, I made a mistake. I'll admit that. But right now, 8 million people are in the dark. The company is facing complete infrastructure collapse. We're looking at a disaster if we don't stabilize the grid in the next 12 hours. Sounds serious, I said. It is serious. We've got hospitals on backup generators. Traffic systems down. The mayor is threatening to declare a state of emergency. Rain, people could die. I watched a hawk circle overhead. Lazy spirals against the darkening sky. What happened to the AI? I asked. The one that was supposed to replace me? Preston hesitated. It's not performing as expected under these conditions. You mean it's failing? It's encountering variables outside its training parameters. Preston, just say it. The AI has no idea what it's doing. It saw the harmonic oscillations and tried to compensate by increasing load. Which made everything worse. And now you've got a cascade failure that's spreading faster than your consultants can even map it. Another silence. How did you? Because I dealt with this exact scenario 4 times in the last 10 years. July 2019. August 2020. June 2022. July 2023. Every time temperatures hit triple digits in the Northeast, the New Jersey trunk lines start oscillating. And every time, I manually adjusted the load distribution to dampen the resonance before it cascaded. Rain, please. His voice cracked. We're out of options. I'm authorizing emergency consulting rates. Triple your old salary. You can start tonight. We'll have a car pick you up from the airport. Preston. I said it quietly. He stopped talking. I'm not in Chicago. I'm in Sedona, Arizona. I'm on vacation. The vacation I started the day you fired me through a press release. Rain, I know this is difficult. I'm not angry, I said. I watched the ice cubes melt in my coffee. Slow. Inevitable. I'm patient. The line went quiet. I could hear him breathing on the other end. Fast. Shallow. Name your price, he said finally. There it was. The moment I'd been waiting for. My price isn't a paycheck anymore, Preston. It's not a salary. It's not stock options or a consulting rate. My price is a percentage of the company. And an admission, in writing, to the board, that you created this crisis by prioritizing cost-cutting over operational safety. That's Rain, I can't. Then good luck with the AI, I said. I'm sure it'll figure things out eventually. Wait. I waited. What percentage? He asked quietly. 5% equity. Full voting rights. And a licensing agreement for the bridge software you've been using without my permission for the last 6 months. The bridge software is company property? Check the patents, Preston. I filed them 2 years ago. In my name. That software is mine. You've been using it without a license. Which means you owe me back payments. And if you want to keep using it, you'll pay going forward. I could hear him breathing. The sound of a man drowning. I need to consult with the board, he said. You have 12 hours, I said. That's how long your backup generators will last. After that, hospitals start making decisions about which patients get life support. Your call, Preston. I hung up. I didn't move for a long time. Just sat there watching the stars come out over the desert. The temperature was dropping. That perfect desert evening where the heat finally breaks and the air smells like sage and dust. My phone lit up 2 hours later. An email. From Preston's corporate counsel. Subject line, urgent, settlement agreement. I opened it. 3 attachments. The licensing agreement. The equity transfer documents. And a letter, signed by Preston Miller and countersigned by 4 members of the Aegis board, admitting that operational decisions made in Q1 2024 contributed to insufficient grid management capacity during the July 15th heat emergency. Corporate speak for, we fucked up and Rain was right. I forwarded everything to my attorney. Typed a single line in the message. Review and execute. I'll be on a plane in 3 hours. Then I sat back and looked at the desert one more time. The stars were out now. Millions of them. The kind of sky you only get when you're far from city lights. In 12 hours, I'd be back in a control room. Manually overriding Preston's AI. Stabilizing the grid. Saving 8 million people from spending another night without power. But this time, I wouldn't be an employee. I'd be an owner. My phone buzzed again. A text message. Not from Preston. From Vera Sterling. Vera, I'm watching the news. Is this what you meant by leverage? I smiled. 3 months ago, before the heat dome, before the blackout, before Preston's desperate phone call, I'd been in Austin, Texas. Sitting in a glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor of a building downtown. Across from me, Vera Sterling. 62 years old. Self-made billionaire. Started as an electrical engineer and built a venture capital empire by betting on energy infrastructure. She'd reached out to me 2 weeks after Preston fired me. Her message had been simple, I heard Aegis let you go. Let's talk. We met in Austin. I showed her the patents. Explained the bridge software. Walked her through exactly how much leverage I had over Aegis Grid Solutions. So you own the keys to their entire operation, she'd said. I own the foundation their entire operation is built on, I'd corrected. Vera had smiled. The smile of someone who recognized a good investment when she saw it. How much do you need? 2 million, I'd said. For startup capital. Legal fees. And enough runway to survive while I build Rain systems into something real. She'd slid a term sheet across the table. I'll give you 5 million. For 20% equity. And I want front row seats when you make Preston Miller beg. We'd shaken hands. And now, sitting in Sedona with the settlement agreement in my inbox and a plane ticket booked for the morning, I texted her back. This is exactly what I meant. 3 dots appeared. She was typing. Vera, make him watch you save his company. Then take everything. I'll have the press release ready. I set the phone down and looked out at the desert one last time. Preston thought he'd fired me to save money. Instead, he'd created his new partner. And I wasn't offering him a solution. I was offering him the only solution. And that's the most valuable thing in the world. Preston called back in 4 hours. Not 12. 4. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when my phone lit up. 2 a.m. Mountain Time. Which meant it was 4 a.m. in New York. The sun would be coming up soon over a city still sitting in the dark. I answered. Rain. His voice was hollow. Defeated. The board has approved your terms. 5% equity. Full voting rights. Licensing agreement for the bridge software. And a formal statement acknowledging that the transition away from your oversight created operational vulnerabilities. In writing? I asked. My lawyer is drafting it now. You'll have it within the hour. Good, I said. Send me VPN access to the control systems. I'll stabilize the grid from here. You're not coming back to Chicago? Preston, I can do this from a laptop in a hotel room. I don't need to be in your office. I just need access to the systems you locked me out of. Silence. The credentials will be in your email in 10 minutes, he said. Then, quietly, thank you. I almost laughed. Don't thank me, Preston. You're paying me 5 times what you used to. Plus back licensing fees for software you've been stealing for 6 months. This isn't charity. This is the most expensive lesson of your career. I hung up. The credentials came through at 2:17 a.m. I opened my laptop. Connected to the Aegis control systems through a secure VPN. And for the first time in 6 months, I was looking at the full grid architecture. It was worse than I'd thought. The AI had made 17 separate load balancing decisions in the last 12 hours. 16 of them were wrong. The system was hemorrhaging stability. Oscillations were cascading through 3 different trunk lines. New Jersey was a disaster. Parts of Connecticut were starting to show the same frequency patterns. If I didn't move fast, the blackout would spread to Boston by morning. I cracked my knuckles. And I got to work. First, dampen the harmonic oscillations. I manually adjusted load distribution across the Jersey trunk lines, pulling power away from the resonant frequencies. Small adjustments. 5 megawatts here. 8 megawatts there. The oscillations started to stabilize. Second, reroute power through the Pennsylvania corridors to take pressure off the overloaded eastern substations. This meant making some calls. I pulled up my old contact list, operators I'd worked with for a decade, and started dialing. Jimmy, it's Rain Vance. I need you to bring substation 47 to full capacity. Yes, I know it's 4 in the morning. Because New York is sitting in the dark and I'm the one fixing it. Thank you. One by one, the substations came back online. Third, override the AI's load predictions and input manual parameters based on actual capacity, not the inflated numbers New Jersey had been reporting. By 5 a.m., the first neighborhoods in Brooklyn had power. By 6 a.m., Manhattan was back online. By 7:30, the entire tri-state area was stable. I closed my laptop, walked out onto the patio, and watched the sunrise over Sedona. The board meeting happened 2 days later. Emergency session. Virtual. I was invited to attend as a consulting stakeholder. I joined the Zoom call from my hotel room. 12 faces on screen. Board members. Executives. Lawyers. And Preston. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Probably hadn't. The board chair, a woman named Margaret Chen, spoke first. Ms. Vance, on behalf of Aegis Grid Solutions, I want to thank you for your rapid response during last week's crisis. Your actions prevented what could have been a catastrophic, prolonged outage. You're welcome, I said. However, she continued, we need to discuss the circumstances that led to this crisis. And the terms of your current agreement with the company. I leaned back in my chair. I'm listening. Margaret looked at Preston. Mr. Miller, would you like to explain to the board why Ms. Vance was no longer employed by Aegis at the time of the blackout? Preston shifted in his seat. We made a strategic decision to transition toward AI-driven monitoring systems. Ms. Vance's role was deemed redundant given the capabilities of the new technology. And how did that technology perform during the heat dome? Margaret asked. Silence. Mr. Miller? It underperformed. It failed, I said quietly. The AI increased load to unstable trunk lines, amplified harmonic oscillations, and triggered a cascade failure that put 8 million people in the dark. That's not underperforming. That's catastrophic negligence. Margaret nodded. Ms. Vance, you mentioned in your agreement terms that you wanted a formal acknowledgement of operational vulnerabilities. I assume you're referring to more than just the AI failure? I smiled. I am. I shared my screen. Budget documents appeared. Spreadsheets showing cost overruns, delayed infrastructure projects, and a $50 million deficit that Preston had been hiding for 18 months. Preston told you he was cutting costs by replacing me with AI. What he didn't tell you was that he was covering up budget mismanagement. The AI transition wasn't about efficiency. It was about hiding his mistakes. The board members' faces went from interested to furious in about 3 seconds. Margaret turned to Preston. Mr. Miller, is this accurate? Preston's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. I can explain. You're terminated, Margaret said. Effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building within the hour. Preston looked at me. His face was pale. Defeated. Rain, please. Goodbye, Preston, I said. And I meant it. 3 months later, I was standing in my new office in Austin, Texas. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. Rain Systems was officially operational. 7 clients. 3 former Aegis engineers who'd joined me. Revenue projections that would have made Preston's head explode. And Aegis Grid Solutions was paying me $400,000 a month in licensing fees for software they couldn't operate without. My phone buzzed. A text from Vera. Vera, drinks tonight? I have 3 more companies that need your kind of help. I smiled. Preston had thought I was disposable. He'd thought expertise was something you could download. That experience was something you could replace with an algorithm and a 25-year-old consultant from Silicon Valley. But here's what people like Preston never understand, you're not paying for my time. You're paying for the 10 years it took me to know what to do in 10 seconds. You're paying for the judgment that can't be coded. The intuition that can't be trained. You're paying for insurance. And insurance is only expensive until you need it. They say it never rains in the desert. But when the storm finally comes, you'd better hope you built your house on more than just hot air. If this story hit home, if you've ever been the rain in someone else's story, the person doing the real work while someone else took the credit, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me what happened. Tell me how you turned it around. Or tell me you're still in the middle of it, still fighting to be seen. Because here's the truth, there are millions of Rains out there. People who keep the lights on. People who do the work that nobody notices until it stops getting done. And every single one of you is worth more than they're paying you. If you want more stories like this, stories about people who refused to stay down, who turned being underestimated into their greatest advantage, hit that subscribe button right now. I've got a whole collection of cautionary tales for people who bet against the wrong person. New story every week. Because the world needs to know what happens when you cut the brake lines. Thanks for watching. This is Rain Vance. And remember, always keep insurance.